The male protagonist of this destined relationship never imagined that the outer streets of this cross-dimensional world would be so desolate. His awesome skills have long been wiped out by other students. In the end, he could only pick up the leftover scraps. A solitary world. Just half an hour before the rain, the male protagonist was just lying on his desk sleeping, but a magic circle suddenly appeared in the classroom. Having read countless cross-time travel novels, he instantly realized this was the prelude to traveling to another world. His excitement lasted only 2.5 seconds, then the male lead calmed down. For him, going to the winged world wasn't as comfortable as staying on Earth and reading novels. He wanted to leave the classroom, but the classroom door was locked by some mysterious force. Whether he used his hands or a chair to smash it, it was useless. He saw the magic circle's light getting brighter and brighter. He had a sudden idea and climbed onto the ceiling. By the time the male lead came to his senses, he was already in a pure white space. He knew instantly that this was a god's domain. Just as he wondered why there was no one here, an eccentric old man appeared in the distance. Seeing the protagonist alone on the path, he rushed over anxiously. It turned out the old man was the god of the winged world. He was surprised to see the protagonist here. Everyone else had already set off for the other world. Then, the deity told the male lead to quickly prepare for the transfer. That is, to set the ability values and skills for the time travel. Suddenly, a huge stone tablet rose up. Each person normally has 50 points to allocate. This can be regarded as a benefit given by gods to those who travel through time. However, because the male lead came too late, those powerful skills were basically all snatched up by his classmates. What was left were a bunch of useless skills. But looking back, he found they were all material skills. For example, throwing dice to gain ability points. The equipment and props are even more outrageous. Heavy soldier, poison elimination, something like villager, a set and shaped glasses. Just from the names, you know they're not good things. It's a bit too shabby. Anyone who's seen the smaller ones knows it's definitely got to be something like a holy knight, or a powerful class like a grand sage to be impressive. As for martial arts here, there's practically only one option left. Is the protagonist supposed to fight people with a cane? The more the protagonist thinks about it, the more speechless he feels. Just because I have a cane, does that mean I can survive in the dark world? Even things like health and walking are considered skills. Taking these with me, I'll die very quickly, right? Magic is no exception. The 4 basic magics have all been selected. All that's left are weak skills like temperature control and movement. Even more speechless is there are actually skills suitable for office workers. The male lead thought, could it be that I have to become a salaryman before I even finish high school? And work at How World? After much deliberation, none of these skills appealed to him. He couldn't stand them. Under the male lead's relentless complaints, even the gods couldn't take it anymore. He turned his shame into anger. He directly handed over all the remaining skills to the male protagonist. Then he teleported him to the winged world. All the useless skills were dumped into the male protagonist's body. Thus, the male protagonist, carrying a bunch of useless skills, began a life in the hard mode black world. Moreover, after being teleported there, he found himself in the middle of a forest. It wasn't even a beginner's village. This was practically a death sentence for him. He hadn't prepared anything yet before arriving. At this moment, he noticed a bag on the ground. It turned out to be the villager A outfit he had despised. When he opened it, he discovered the bag was actually an infinite storage bag. There are also things like invisible glasses and other beginner equipment. Just by looking at them, you know they're leftovers from someone else. But since I've already taken them, it's better than nothing. After putting on all this equipment, the male protagonist decided to check his status. When he opened his information, the system made him roll the dice first. It turns out his abilities are determined by dice rolls. The male lead is really furious. He's basically just clearing out their inventory for them. But there's no other way. To survive, he still needs the dice. It's just that what comes up isn't a number, but a big, fat M character. A bad image suddenly flashed through the male lead's mind. Could it be that as soon as I time traveled, I'm going to become an M? Luckily, the system is still quite serious. He pondered where to add the points. After a moment's thought, the male lead decided to choose luck. After all, only with enough luck can one live more easily. After successfully adding the points, the information finally appeared before the protagonist. He then realized that the M on the dice meant max. His luck successfully broke the limit at both health, sensitivity, gymnastics, and walking. However, the male protagonist's other abilities are really unbearable to watch. While chasing, he suddenly discovered something. He had a very unique ability, and that was fate binding. Since the male protagonist was summoned here alone, he couldn't form a team with others. In contrast, he can gain companions through his abilities. This is simply icing on the cake for the male protagonist. Because before his time travel, he was an outsider in his class. He had no connection with any of the cliques. He wasn't involved with any of the small groups. It would be better to spend time reading more books. Unfortunately, due to his skills, the male lead won't have a chance to build a harem in the wing world either. His current top priority is to find a safe base to build a home of his own. So the male lead explored the forest, discovering that the visibility inside was exceptionally poor. It's not as convenient as it seemed in the novel at all. If I encounter a demon, it'll be even worse. Then he suddenly remembered the shape-shifting glasses. After he put them on, he discovered that the functions and names of all the items in front of him actually appeared before him. The male lead, shaken, was also curious about the glasses principle. He opened the system to find out that the glasses possessed certain abilities. After obtaining this golden finger, the male lead's search process became much smoother. He quickly found edible mushrooms. Because there is space for storage, no matter how much food he has, he can take it away effortlessly. After having a good time, he discovered an uninhabited cave not far away that is very suitable for use as a shelter. There happened to be a tent and a lantern in the prop bag. The hero immediately decided to stay here tonight. After lighting a bonfire at night, he suddenly felt that these useless skills didn't seem so bad after all. Perhaps it was because he was too tired during the day. He quickly felt sleepiness creeping in. He was a little worried about falling asleep. But it wasn't even half a second later that he fell fast asleep. Fortunately, nothing unexpected happened all night. This is also thanks to the protective effect of the props. And the male lead's persona allows the male lead to stay safe inside without outside interference. The first thing he did after waking up was to prepare a delicate breakfast. Don't ask where these cooking utensils came from. It's from Villager A's starter pack. This thing doesn't have any powerful weapons, but he has to use it. It's top-notch for wilderness survival. After eating and drinking, he needs to think about his future life. The protagonist plans to live in a cave first. Food has become the top priority. Of course, he also needs to guard against any monsters that might appear. While he was thinking, the system suddenly detected an unusual aura. The male protagonist poked his head out from the bushes. He discovered it was a small goblin. Although its size wasn't large, its ability values were unexpectedly high. The male protagonist was initially a little nervous, but thinking about facing these monsters in the future, if he can't even beat the simplest goblins, he won't be able to survive. So he used packaging magic to infuse his magic into a stick. After getting ready, with lightning speed, he swung his stick and knocked down a goblin. Another pair of goblins discovered the protagonist, but they moved exceptionally slowly. Their attack pattern was also very monotonous. The protagonist quickly discovered their weakness. After successfully taking down the two goblins, evening arrived. After his first successful hunt, the protagonist gained a lot of confidence. When he returned to the cave, he enjoyed another feast of roasted mushrooms. After battling the bear, he realized his level and stats had improved. By the third day, he was tired of eating mushrooms. So, he decided to hunt some animals. But before that, he chose to train himself properly. So the male protagonist began to learn a skill, one involving goblin gates. Now he no longer needs to attack from behind. He can easily defeat even a rain of goblins. But if he encounters 3 goblins together, he still has to choose to run away. The following days, during daytime, the protagonist spends his time fighting goblins. At night, he studies magic at his shelter. To be precise, he spends time playing creative games. By the 5th day, the protagonist can finally defeat goblins with a single move. The cave's decorations have also become more luxurious. Life has finally gotten on track. Thanks to his improved abilities, the male protagonist's diet is no longer limited to mushrooms. He started hunting wild animals in the forest. He finally caught a large wild white rabbit. Just as he was about to go back and enjoy it, he suddenly sensed an unknown presence. Upon closer inspection, he found they were classmates who had time traveled. However, these people were the male lead's least favorite delinquent teenagers. He really didn't want to interact with them. He intended to sneak away. But his intuition told him there must be other classmates here. After activating his inner eye, more classmates appeared within the male lead's field of vision. There's a gang of hot girls, and muscular men, and more muscular men. Of course, there are also the good students, led by the class monitor. You should know that among these people, the person he most wants to see is the class monitor, because he and the class monitor have been childhood sweethearts. So the male lead goes to seek them out. The class leader should be the best one to take responsibility, but he hasn't really stepped out yet. The protagonist hesitated and spoke up. He felt that his current life suited him the most. This sense of liberation and isolation was perfect for someone like him. The boy never expected that the worst delinquents in the class also come to Wing World. They still retain their own excellent traditions. They chose the most vulgar charm and shame skills. They want to take all the girls in the class as their own harem. Not long ago the male lead found in the forest the classmates who were teleported to the winged world. It's just that, as a passerby, the male protagonist doesn't plan to go up and meet them. He finds conquering this world alone is the most comfortable. Just as he was about to leave, he noticed the delinquent group getting closer to his position. He didn't have time to escape, so the male protagonist simply jumped into the grass. But he was still heard by them. Just as the blonde leader of the group was about to spot the male lead, the rabbit the male lead had caught earlier suddenly jumped out of the grass and saved the male lead's life. Seeing that it was just a rabbit from the forest, they lowered their guard and left. The delinquent gang was chatting by the river about something. The male protagonist was very curious about their conversation. So, he secretly hid behind a tree nearby to eavesdrop. Unexpectedly, this group of people ended up in the winged world. Yet, their minds were still filled with indecent thoughts. They even started talking about the girls' figures in class. Blondie's favorite was the vice class president. He said her big assets could practically suffocate someone. Even in the winged world, they were top-notch. Others also have their own goals. The protagonist thought they were just making rude jokes about girls, so he didn't pay attention. He figured the class monitor would definitely stop them. That's the biggest person among the delinquents. However, at that moment, he suddenly saw the blonde-haired guy pull over a guy named Tanaka. Was he about to use his skills? Then he can do whatever he wants to those girls. After receiving an affirmative answer, Yellowhead and the others were extremely excited. The male protagonist didn't take their conversation to heart. Seeing the delinquent group get up and leave, he went home. But as soon as he got home, he discovered that his affinity skill had actually improved. He has already decided to cross the wings world alone. But this feeling of being far away from everyone still makes him a bit uncomfortable. However, since his level is still at 3, so it should be nothing. What is the impact of those skills? Cloth armor? Leather? This is a waste of time. The user can't focus on just one thing. He'll never become anything. As for the wooden man, it refers to a puppet. To put it simply, they're both just things. The only way to replenish the male protagonist's energy now is to eat. Unfortunately, because today's hunt yielded nothing, the male protagonist can only eat mushrooms again. This continued until the 7th night. There's been a constant knocking sound coming from the forest. The male lead is unable to sleep because of the noise. So he goes out to check it out. He finds that it's his class's group of otaku. They are fighting goblins. As an experienced time traveler, the male lead watches them struggling so hard. He can't help but feel a little sympathetic. But on closer inspection, he found that the clown was actually himself. They each have specialized professions. And what's more, they have exclusive skills like cheat codes. He is not even in the same league as them, a mere nobody. This is also because the cliques in his class each have their own unique advantages. Some of them are top athletes. Others are the children of well-known figures. Their reputations are well-earned. Yes, they're all homebodies. So, they must have watched a lot of anime worldwide. The protagonist feels there's no need to worry anymore and gets ready to leave. Suddenly, the system detected a dangerous aura. Suddenly, a goblin actually snuck up from behind. If they succeeded in stealing, then those otaku would be finished. Although the male protagonist wants to be a destined person, but thinking about those otaku in class, they even lending him novels, so he couldn't bear it but help them. The battle ended with the male lead's help. The otaku also defeated the goblin. They didn't expect that here, they would actually encounter the protagonist. Immediately after, the protagonist took them to his secret base. They saw this luxuriously decorated cave. Even the otaku were envious. Surprisingly, the male lead was eating alone. Afterward, the male lead asked about the situation of the other classmates. He wanted to know why they were still outside late at night. Unexpectedly, the otaku group was actually escaping. And it all started from the day the classmates arrived in the forest. Because everything happened so suddenly, no one was prepared. Most of the class panicked. Some were even calling for their parents. Only the otaku group remained calm. They were still studying their skills. At this time, the class monitor stood up and tried to calm everyone down. Knowing that a large group of goblins suddenly appeared here, even the class monitor was stunned. The girls in the class were even louder in their cries. Those delinquent boys were completely useless. They were so scared they sat down on the ground. At that moment, the nerds stood up like saviors. Seeing that they were just a group of weak goblins, they immediately launched an attack. Inspired by the nerds, the muscular men also joined the fight. Finally, all the goblins were eliminated. Afterwards, for safety reasons, everyone relocated. They came to a safe river and set up camp there. Every classmate helped each other. The situation is gradually improving, but not everyone is so cooperative. For example, that group of delinquent boys, and those hot girls, don't want to work at all. Because of one bad apple, the whole pot is spoiled. Everyone has become a scattered group. Only the otaku group remained after work, and a small number of students were still online. The otaku even took on the goblin resistance quest. But they were also wary of those delinquents, because when choosing skills, they saw that group take the charm and puppet skills. They needed to work hard to level up, only then can they protect the classmates. Little did they know, while they were improving their skills, the delinquents were also working hard. It's just that the delinquents' conversation was all witnessed by the otaku group. Their little schemes and plans were all discovered by the otaku group. They then immediately reported it to the class monitor, so the class leader made up their mind. They decided to level up as well. However, a few days later, this group of delinquents successfully unlocked the skills of guilt and charm. It just so happened that the class leader passed by them. They suddenly wanted to make a move on the class leader. But before anything could happen, the next second the class monitor wiped them all out. Following that, the otaku group used their sealing skills, locking away all their charms and puppets. The bad boys whose harem plan was exposed was also brought to the camp. They thought the matter had come to a satisfactory end. Little did they know that those delinquent boys, not long after, made a comeback and began indiscriminately attacking their classmates. They even set fire to all the tents. After having a good time, they just left. Their base was destroyed. Everyone blamed the otaku group for the mistake. The hot girls were the worst. It's all because they showed off. That's why they were targeted by the delinquents. In the end, only the class monitor spoke up for them. The otaku group felt guilty, so they left the campsite on their own initiative. After hearing their story, the male lead felt extremely guilty. To feed his friends, he directly brought out a large pile of mushrooms. He's lacking everything now, but what he's least lacking are these mushrooms. The otaku group finally had a good meal. It wasn't until the next day that the male lead also gave them a large amount of mushrooms for their journey. Originally, the otaku group wanted to invite the male lead to go with them, because they planned to follow the river to go into town. The male lead is actually a classmate, so they should all go together. But the male lead has already decided to be a destined person, so he coolly rejected them. The nerds were all stunned by the male lead's coolness. In the end, she had no choice but to leave the protagonist behind. After they left, the protagonist decided to check on how the other classmates were doing. On the way, he encountered an attack by a dog and even got bitten. Who knows if the other world has rabies vaccines? He kept walking until nightfall, and finally reached the original campsite, but he found no one here. Following the skills guidance, he walked towards the opposite bank of the river. He didn't expect to run into the spicy girls here. He originally wanted to escape, but realized they had spotted him first. The spicy girls aggressively pursued him. He didn't want to turn around at first, until they stopped worshipping themselves. Only after asking clearly did he know that this hot girl was looking for the nerds. Because she saw that the male lead usually had a good relationship with the nerds, she just wanted to ask. But the male lead didn't want to easily tell them about the nerds' whereabouts. He knew the spicy girls just want to mess with the nerds. He only now realized that they actually live under the protection of the nerds. This kind of thing, on Earth the male lead wouldn't even dare to dream of. But he unintentionally told the spicy girls about the nerds' actions. To dispel their ideas, the male lead was forced to say something harsh. These words directly hurt the girls' feelings. In the end, they actually burst into tears. They expressed their grievances, saying they just wanted to apologize. The male lead was dumbfounded. The plot is taking an unexpected turn, and they even worship the male lead. Before finding the otaku, please teach them survival skills and the ability to defeat monsters. Because of their inexplicable request, the protagonist's summoning skill was activated. The protagonist is even more unlucky now. How inexplicably did he get 3 hot, younger female followers? In the following period, the hot girls have been following the male lead. But the effect of this 1 billion is really great. Chasing a group of people is like being a nephew. His eyes are empty, as if he has no rationality. No matter what the male lead wants, the girls are willing to give. They are just following the most primitive instinct. Even if they are injured, they don't know how to use medicine to treat it. The male protagonist collapsed. If the class monitor saw this scene, he would definitely be scolded to death. He sat on the ground and drew little circles for himself, his mind full of the written reprimand from the class monitor. Little did he know, speak of the devil. The class monitor just arrived nearby, and called out to the male lead for a long time. Because the male lead was too focused, he didn't hear her at all. He was startled by the squad leader's furious roar. Meanwhile, the delinquent boys, spending the night in the forest, were already plotting their next move. The protagonist never imagined that right after turning the group of hot girls into his slaves, he would be discovered by his childhood friend, the squad leader. Not only that, but all the girls from his class arrived as well. The squad leader noticed something was off about the spicy girls. She cast a suspicious glance at the male lead. The male lead sighed. He was in a hopeless situation. He could only honestly explain the whole story. His monster-subduing skill had unexpectedly affected the spicy girls. The girls' eyes were cold as frost. Surely some of them must have ice magic. The male lead was in a difficult position and decided to leave. The girls didn't plan to let him go, until the class monitor tried to wake the hot girl. Unexpectedly, it actually worked. So the class monitor decided to ask the hot girl to confirm the truth. The male lead stood there, motionless. The male lead felt wronged. Because ever since he last controlled the hot girls, he had felt the terrifying power of the hot girl group. Every day he is either controlled by them or dragged around aimlessly. What's more, now there's the class monitor, who controls the delinquents. Here, the male lead now doesn't dare to take any real action. He's only worried about himself now, whether he'll be beaten to a pulp later. While those girls were discussing what to do next, the male lead, bored, experimented with his skills. He ended up burying himself in the ground while experimenting. He was preparing to meet his great-grandparents. The class monitor didn't expect the male lead to have such a peculiar hobby, and directly pulled him out of the ground. The male protagonist felt weak and helpless for the first time. She mentions that the girls are discussing how to ask the male protagonist later. She asks how many people his home can accommodate. The male protagonist thinks and then answers. His home can accommodate 240 people. For the girls, hearing this felt like their whole worldview collapsed. Didn't you enter the other world an hour earlier than me? How is it possible? They even discussed it with the protagonist if they could stay at his house for a while. A high school girl is going to spend the night at his house. At this point, the male lead has even thought about having children in the future. He instantly felt himself getting hard. If it weren't for the class monitor being there, he would have taken his clothes off right now. So the female classmate followed the male lead back to his cave. Seeing a villa that looks like a modern luxury home, every female classmate was extremely excited.
直接把全身上下的衣服都脱光了。
Watching his clothes drift down in front of him, the male protagonist felt like he was in heaven. His female classmates were all bathing. His heart was completely captivated. How could there be such a blissful moment? Even when he went to bed that night, he couldn't stop thinking about it. This feeling of being with so many female classmates, it's something ordinary people can't imagine. But he still loved the feeling of sleeping alone the most. This was the first time he felt this happy without being a destined person. At this time, the class monitor suddenly came to his tent door to express her gratitude. Without the main character, these girls wouldn't know what to do. The muscular group left the campsite. These girls used to live a lonely and helpless life. They barely had enough to eat. They never thought they'd have such a comfortable environment now. Luxurious rooms, a kitchen for cooking, and a bathroom for showering. It's simply invigorating. This excellent class monitor is so self-deprecating. Not only did she fail to unite the classmates, but instead made everyone more fractured. The male lead comforted her, saying she had already done a great job. She even protected so many female classmates today. The class monitor still felt bad. She couldn't be like those otaku. But the male lead didn't think so. Those otaku spend their days reading novels and manga. They've long been prepared to come to the wing world. The squad leader doesn't look at those things every day. Of course, she would appear flustered and at a loss. But the male lead's comfort didn't make her feel better. Instead, she felt that saying this was too much for the otaku group. The male lead didn't care about any of that. In his eyes, the squad leader is the best. The squad leader's heart was cheered up by the male lead's comfort. And the male lead was especially shy. To be able to give everyone such a good life. With this cute expression, the male lead almost couldn't suppress his gun. He still couldn't sleep that night. His mind was full of those girls. High school students wearing panties. By the time it was the next morning, the purple-haired girl specifically came to wake up the male lead. Still half asleep, he didn't quite register what was happening. Seeing a girl in a school uniform leaning toward him, the male lead felt it was impossible to get up. Otherwise, his little brother would get too close to her. However, his desire to eat fish overcame any inappropriate thoughts. After all, mornings are meant for eating fish. He didn't even have time to react. He just got up, eating fish and crying. Chasing the cylinder is simply a gift from heaven. The class monitor and the purple-haired girl were speechless. Why would someone cry while looking at fish? Only the main character knows this kind of suffering. He eats mushrooms every day. Seeing the fish in the river crying, he knows how the Air Force feels. Seeing the male lead like this, even the squad leader feels a little heartache. He directly used the external array. It's the first time the fish have been struck by lightning magic. They were caught in an instant. The male lead watches the pursuing enemy. He asks his classmate to demonstrate again. Then, while they were demonstrating, he used his packaging magic to contain the lightning. He successfully caught the small fish in the river. Now this guy has learned lightning magic too. The class monitor was also stunned. How did you learn that move? When the male lead revealed his use of packaging magic, everyone was simultaneously shocked, thinking he was joking. But the male lead remained very low-key. Plus, he was also very surprised himself. This kind of magic was his first ever skill. Afterwards, he asked the class monitor what they planned to do next. Upon learning they were going to the town to level up, he mentioned waiting. The male lead's plan isn't flawed. Going to the town is definitely the best choice. Plus, the Spicy Girls group already ready to hunt the town's otaku group. For the Spicy Girls' success, he first checked everyone's abilities. He found that these people's levels were terrifyingly high. The lowest was level 16. What's the point of teaching them? He's only level 7. Just picking anyone would be enough to beat him senseless. And these reserve players were completely unaware of how strong they actually were. They were still urging the male lead to quickly use the beginner tutorial. Perhaps this is what they call not knowing what you have until it's gone. To help everyone level up, the male lead will have these girls first try to defeat the dog-headed people in the forest. You should know that these dog-headed people are not only cutely foolish, their level is only 3. These hot girls are all high level. That kind of level difference is basically a dimensional strike. But what the girls didn't expect was not even half a day had passed. These guys were all taken down. The male lead was speechless. How could they be so trashy? Chasing girls, each one with so many demands saying they didn't know that dog-headed people wouldn't bite. The male lead was shocked. Dogs don't bite people, so what? Should they act as your guards instead? After performing the ritual in the tent, they're full of fighting spirit again and ready to start hunting. Even though these people aren't very strong, their determination is still commendable. Just at this moment, the purple-haired girl who shouted at the male lead to wake up this morning suddenly apologized to him. Because of a previous encounter with delinquents, she was afraid of boys, so she was so rude to the male lead. But now she's not afraid anymore. Considering the male lead provided everyone with lodging, and even taught everyone survival methods, so she decided to leave early tomorrow morning, making a delicious breakfast for the male lead. If it weren't for this guy being the destined person, he'd have to start a harem in another world. Unfortunately, all that awaits him is grilled fish, no girls at all. Those reckless guys are actually preparing to go hunt monsters. Luckily, the class monitor stopped them, decided to start training first. Under the guidance of the male lead and the class monitor, the Spicy Girls' special training officially began. However, the dog-headed men's strength was ultimately a bit inferior to the Spicy Girls. Plus, the chasing group of Spicy Girls got sleepy whenever it came to fighting. They even pretended to be sick. What's the point of fighting like this? But the dog-headed men didn't care whether they were sick or not. They launched a direct attack. Just then, the purple-haired girl took the lead. Thanks to the Spicy Girls' efforts, the dogs were finally defeated. The class monitor was also exceptionally excited. However, what they didn't expect was that a group of gnolls were actually captured. They even shook hands with the Spicy Girls. These girls had a wild idea. They even wanted to subdue them. Because of the intense training recently, the male lead was exhausted and collapsed on the ground. The squad leader looked at him with immense gratitude, wanting the male lead to go with him to town. But he only wanted to be a bystander. However, it was the squad leader's request, so he certainly couldn't refuse. Therefore, all the girls prepared to carry a large bag of mushrooms. They set off on a journey to the town. The protagonist saw how effortlessly everyone was grinding away and didn't want to dampen their spirits. He simply cheered on the class leader, urging them to work together to reach the town. Unfortunately, that very night, some male classmates in the class were attacked by a mysterious person. The protagonist stepped in to protect the female classmates. Not intimidated by the delinquent gang, he decides to cross the forest with them. On the way, they encounter a gigantic boar monster. As a seasoned fighter, the protagonist naturally seizes the chance to impress the girls. He uses it as a benchmark for action. When the boar monster smashes into the ground, it turns out it hits nothing at all. At this time, the male protagonist hid behind a tree. He laughed at its clumsy movements. Because the otaku group had previously warned the male protagonist that the boar monster had exceptionally high armor. However, its magic resistance was only average. Therefore, it was necessary to use concentrated magical attacks to barely scratch it. Naturally, the male protagonist wouldn't foolishly charge and fight it head-on. He hid and searched for a usable magic skill. Logically, magic skills are divided into fire, earth, water, and wind. But the protagonist's system has combined those 4 attributes into one. Now he only lacks fire magic. The others were all stolen through external packaging magic. Just as he was fortunate that even trash skills had their moment, a huge hammer flew over his head. The large tree behind him was directly smashed in half. This wild boar monster actually didn't play fair and ambushed me. Luckily, he reacted quickly. He dodged all of its attacks. Such an arrogant move instantly angered me. With a flash, he flew to the top of the wild boar monster's head. Unexpectedly, the wild boar monster fell to the ground immediately. This was completely unexpected. He looked at my female classmates' resentful gazes. Next time, he will definitely follow the otaku group's tips. Soon, he encountered a wild boar monster again. This time, he dared not forget. He hesitated. A flame rose in his hand. This was fire magic he learned through thermal magic studies. He lightly tossed it toward the wild boar monster's head. He didn't expect the opponent to just drop dead like that. The male lead was speechless. What happened to being tough and resilient? How did I kill them so effortlessly? The female classmates behind him complained even more. From start to finish, he had no technique at all. What kind of reference is that supposed to be? The male lead could only smile awkwardly. As night fell, the female classmates gathered together to eat barbecue. The male lead, however, hid himself in a corner, using earth magic to create a trap. He added a magical barrier and a protection system, ensuring the female classmates' safety. Then he opened the system, and discovered that his fixed skill had extended to include map skills. This is simply a must-have for traveling and home use. Just as he was figuring out the next move, the system suddenly issued a warning. Right after that, silhouettes appeared not far away. The protagonist thought it was a gang of delinquents, staring nervously at them. When the figures came closer, he realized it was a group of muscular teens. The protagonist let out a sigh of relief. These people don't have that many thoughts. And the class monitor also walked to their vicinity at this time. The male lead originally thought the muscular boys were looking for a female classmate. He found out they were actually looking for him. Could it be that they are tough on the outside but soft on the inside? The male lead was curious why they didn't appear in front of the female classmates. The boys stammered, saying they didn't dare to trust anyone, because someone has mastered a skill called snatching. This skill is even more dangerous than charm and puppetry. The delinquents were thrilled with charm and puppetry, but they never mentioned this skill. That means it's in someone else's hands. The male protagonist, upon hearing this, revealed a villainous expression as he looked at him and inquired what would happen if this skill were in his possession. But they felt that doing so would actually reassure people. The male lead suddenly felt it was pointless. Following that, the muscular boy group warned the male lead to be careful. They were going deep into the forest to watch the delinquent group. As for the class monitor and the others, they were left to the male lead. Watching them go away, the male lead didn't forget to tease them, telling them if they got into trouble, to go find the goblins. They're all idiots. They must have something in common. The next morning arrived. Because they still had to move through the forest, each girl had prepared a weapon. The male lead was a little speechless. Why are they so excited so early in the morning? Could it be that they ate poisonous mushrooms? Just as he was about to scout the path, the class leader found him. Last night, she included both the conversation with the muscle youth group and the protagonist. Then, she suddenly apologized to the protagonist. The protagonist immediately figured it out. The class leader couldn't understand why he wasn't afraid of her at all. A terrifying ability that steals the opponent's skills entirely. Most people would definitely be scared. But our protagonist isn't fazed. If someone else had it, they'd probably abuse it recklessly. But the class rep would never use it for wrongdoing. After all, not every class rep is kind and innocent. Previously, the otaku team sealed the delinquent team's rain skill, but they didn't trust her. This line almost moved the class president to tears. The male lead originally wanted to tease her, but her sincere gaze and words held him back. After walking for quite a while, everyone finally decided to take a break. The male lead took the opportunity to liven things up. Playful and energetic, he grabbed a box and started selling juice. But, of course, this good stuff couldn't be free. Since there was no money, beauty had to be the currency. He noticed a female classmate lifting her shirt. The male lead is overwhelmed with excitement. Unfortunately, a single glance from the class leader crushed his mood. After taking a brief rest, they continued forward. At this moment, everyone was both thirsty and exhausted. Luckily, at this point, the male lead noticed a river not far away. He just remembered a new skill he wanted to try. After he got rid of the class monitor, he immediately ran towards the river. After making sure no one was behind him, he first used a magic skill to infuse his body with magic, and then used levitation to lighten his body. Immediately afterwards, he lightly ascended into the sky like a water sprite. But he only remembers going up, but forgot what he was supposed to do next. Did a backstroke in the sky for a second and a half, then plummeted heavily toward the ground. If it weren't for the magic strengthening his body, his health bar would have been completely drained. When he returned to the camp that evening, the squad leader was stunned. How could someone end up like this just from scouting? The protagonist casually made up an excuse, trying to brush it off, but he still couldn't avoid a scolding from the class monitor. He brought out the fruit he had painstakingly picked, but this had no effect on the class monitor. Instead, it attracted the other girls. Yesterday, the male lead had scouted the route in advance, so the journey was exceptionally smooth. He not only helped a lost child find their mother, but also witnessed the female students playing in the water. They encountered a wild bear. After overcoming these numerous hardships, they finally successfully walked out of the forest. Looking at the wide plain before them, all the female classmates were overjoyed. But the male lead still didn't relax, because danger lurked everywhere. He once again opened the system interface. He discovered that he had unexpectedly learned a new skill called air step. Unexpectedly, this move allowed him to walk in the air. Watching the protagonist run into the air, the class monitor was terrified. She started her nagging again. The protagonist used his farsight ability to scout the area. He unexpectedly discovered the natives of this world. Those people seemed to be suffering from a demonic curse. The male lead reported this urgent news to the class monitor. The kind class monitor thought they should go to the rescue quickly. This naive idea was immediately rejected by the male lead. Those people, he didn't know if they were good or bad. What if they were thieves or robbers? All those girls would be finished. He didn't want to get involved. Until the class monitor suddenly grabbed him. The monitor's answer was as the male lead expected. He didn't continue to argue. Instead, he decided to go himself. After all, he came here specifically to solve this kind of situation. Next came the male lead's moment to show off. He prepared to continue using yesterday's combination skill. As his skills stacked together, the male lead slowly rose. This time, he also applied wind magic to himself. Just as the male lead was admiring his own cleverness, he discovered the class monitor was actually behind him. He didn't expect that the wind magic had actually swept her in. She urged the male lead to stop. Unfortunately, this move can only ascend to the heavens but cannot land safely. Thus, the protagonist and the class monitor ventured into the otherworldly rift. The natives were caught off guard. The sudden explosions left them completely stunned. Meanwhile, the monsters were instantly obliterated by the impact of the protagonist and the class monitor. Thanks to the protagonist and his group, they were rescued. Afterward, Chief Ofta discussed matters with the protagonist. They're adventurers from the Adventurers Guild. This time, they received a commission to escort goods. They thought they'd make a killing, but now the wagon's overturned. The goods are scattered all over the place. They're in a terrible state. Since the female classmates haven't arrived yet and the class monitor hasn't woken up yet, the male lead was already getting along well with some people. He took out his own roasted mushrooms. Everyone ate them and thought they were delicious. Unexpectedly, the male lead ate this kind of mushroom every day. This thing was actually a rare stamina mushroom. After the others ate them, their physical strength increased significantly. His spirit and energy were completely restored. Soon, the squad leader also woke up. But at a glance, he saw the male lead in an attacking bear stance. He was upset because Uncle Yubu teamed up with a pretty anime girl. Soon, those female classmates followed. They walked a distance with Xiao Sui. Finally, they saw the town they had longed for. To commemorate this historic moment, everyone held hands. In the forest at this time, the delinquent boys still didn't know the girls had already reached town. They had finally leveled up, and were already eager. They prepared to go find the girls to have some fun. But before that, they planned to take out the nerd squad first, to lift the enchantment and puppet magic seals. Meanwhile, the muscle boy squad nervously hides behind a tree, watching their evil plan. After a series of adventures, the male protagonist finally manages to safely deliver all the female classmates to town. Seeing so many living people, and towns full of dark domain charm, the girls are in great spirits. Unfortunately, because of the male lead's significant other's characteristics, he feels out of place here. But now his mission is successfully completed. He originally planned to return to the forest and resume his quiet life. However, ideals are full, but reality is harsh. Because the squad leader is here, the male lead not only couldn't escape, he even got scolded by the squad leader for secretly leaving. He blew a whistle. After these many days of training, all the female classmates became as obedient as loyal dogs. In less than half a second, they all assembled. Following that, the squad leader announced the following itinerary. Let's go to the Adventurers Guild first. Sell those spoils for money. Then, register as adventurers. Finally, let's go to the inn to rest. In the meantime, they can also take some time to gather information on the otaku group. The hotties aren't happy. How can you treat the otaku group as an afterthought? Looking at her anxious expression, the male lead came over smelling gossip. He playfully teases her, made the hot girl embarrassed. Soon, the group arrived at the Adventurers Guild. But inside, all the adventurers looked fierce and menacing. Their eyes were full of murderous intent towards the male lead. Immediately, Ofu Ta urged the male lead to go with him. Immediately afterwards, Ofu Ta urged the male lead to go with him to see the chairman. Even if it's a dragon's lair and tiger's den ahead, he has no choice but to go now. He and the class monitor first took the girls to register their imposter identities. Then they went to the second floor alone. Before she was saved by the red-haired guy, at the chairman's office door. He captivated the audience. He looked the most amiable. The president was even more terrifying. He was covered in scars. The male lead thought he was about to be killed. While he was wondering what would happen next, President's attitude did a complete 180-degree turn. The male lead is dumbfounded. Just moments ago, he was full of murderous intent. How did it suddenly turn into an award ceremony? But this is better than getting beaten up. The male lead hurriedly goes downstairs. He happens to see a trading window. So he goes over to sell his magic stones. The glasses girl gestures for him to place the magic stones in the display case. As a result, the male lead stared at it for a long time, not knowing where to put it. The girl with glasses was just about to mock him for being blind. The next second, she saw a large bag of magic stones spill out. Now it was her turn to be dumbfounded. The guild didn't have nearly enough money for that. At this moment, the class leader happened to return with the girls after registering them as adventurers. What nobody expected was these young girls have all surpassed level 30. Instantly, the adventurers here all began showing their admiration for them. As expected, this world still relies on strength. Next up, it's the male protagonist's turn. Since those girls could successfully become adventurers, it should be even easier for him. He can finally bid farewell to the days without status. The male lead walked in so proudly. The class monitor also had high expectations for the male lead. It was all thanks to the male lead's protection that they made it this far. Everyone was able to reach the town safely. Unfortunately, the higher the expectation, the greater the disappointment. The male lead, because he's below level 10, doesn't qualify to become an adventurer. Just one level short. Shatter all the male lead's beautiful dreams. But the rules are the rules. Even if the male lead knelt on the ground and begged her, there's nothing he can do. What's more, only registered adventurers can have their level restrictions relaxed. If the male lead wants to register, he needs to reach level 20 to become an adventurer. Now the male lead is completely hopeless. Level 10 is far beyond his reach. The skills of a fatebound make it impossible for him to form a team. This is clearly making things difficult for him. Is he destined to be alone for his entire life? Seeing how disheartened the protagonist looks now, the class leader decides to lead everyone in the next operation. At last, everyone arrives at the guild-recommended inn. The lively and decadent atmosphere leaves the protagonist stunned. The hotel staff came out to greet them. He just wanted to know if this was a themed hotel in the wing world. He only confirmed it after seeing the interior decoration. It was just an ordinary hotel. Soon everyone fell asleep, only he didn't fall asleep. Although the bed was very comfortable, he still preferred living in the forest. The next day, the class monitor, after inquiring, learned that Joy was a fairly safe town, and that it had all sorts of shops. Seeing the girls' lives settling down in the town, the male lead decided to exchange the magic stones. After taking everything, he returned to the forest. But a day passed, and the guild's funds still weren't fully collected. Because the magic stones the male lead brought out were simply too many, the guild leader hoped the male lead would accept installment payments. Even so, the money the male lead received from the first wave alone was a full 8 million. He finally turned his life around. Actually, his income isn't just magic stones. Even the reward from defeating the magic wolf is included. Now he's got some money. The class monitor is preparing to go shopping with his buddies. At this time, the red-haired boy mysteriously tells the male lead, that place is full of a man's romance. Good brothers always understand each other without many words. The protagonist's first reaction was thinking of one of those shops full of older women. But he muttered that it wasn't a good idea. However, his body honestly followed along anyway. Who would have thought the red-haired guy brought him to a weapon shop of all places? Special tools for officials. But the shopkeeper looked withered and dry. But he's a very nice person. The male lead, with the attitude of since I'm already here, began to select items. I didn't know until I looked, but it was amazing. Suddenly, he wanted all sorts of things. Soon, it was evening again. The male lead found a piece of jewelry called 7, and discovered it had the same markings as Villager A's set. After asking around, he learned that this item could transfer abilities to other objects. The abilities could be added to another item. He decided to use it with care. As he was thinking about how to use this valuable item, the class monitor appeared again. It was already late at night. Everyone else had gone to sleep. She commands like an old nanny. The male lead immediately goes back to sleep. The male lead holds a parasitic vine. He asks the squad leader to let him try it before going back. The prop suddenly starts to glow. It startled the male lead. It also fused all the props he had carefully selected together. The male lead was dumbfounded. The old master was furious. You see, the value of those props added up to over 10 million. The male lead's defense completely crumbled. However, after pleading from the redhead and the class monitor, the price was finally reduced to 8 million. But the 8 million the male lead had worked so hard to get, it's all gone again in an instant. Back to square one, completely penniless. He doesn't have his imposter identity now. He can't use his pass to leave town yet. Even if he tried to blend in with the girls to leave the city, the squad leader would immediately catch him and bring him back. He can't leave yet. The protagonist increasingly misses his forest. Fortunately, he has a lot of props now. Previously through Compound the Cape of the Villager has a tangible ability. He wore a cloak and used shielding aura and secret skills. Easily recruit girls to pass through the crowd, walk out of the hotel smoothly and start breathing the free air. The hero thought that hope was just ahead. He arrived near the city wall. Suddenly, he heard a girl calling him from behind. As a result, he couldn't stop in time. He crashed hard into the city wall. Just watching it makes me feel sorry for the poor guy. He never expected to run into this classmate while chasing something. He remembered back in school, this girl is one of the infamous 4 brainless queens. But then he suddenly realized one of the queens was missing. The answer must be nearby. Sure enough, that female classmate was buying something nearby. And her clothes were almost completely off. Even her breasts were half exposed. He remembers she liked streaking at school. People rushed up to stop them. After the female classmate was lectured by the male lead and his friends, she crouched on the ground, feeling wronged. The male lead had no choice but to go comfort her. He chased after a piece of clothing that suited her very well. Unfortunately, due to the intervention of the 4 heavenly kings, the male lead's first escape plan completely failed. The next day, the class monitor, fully prepared, led everyone out for their first mission. Because of yesterday's failed escape, the male lead was forbidden by the squad leader from going along today. The squad leader forbade him from going along. But this was exactly what the male lead wanted. He wore a hooded cloak and easily slipped out of the city gate. His beloved forest was not far away, but his journey was fraught with difficulties. First, a desolate village. Then, a group of goblins. Right after that, a wagon being attacked. From inside the wagon came cries for help. The protagonist wanted to save them, but the desire to return home outweighed his kindness. At this moment, he chose to ignore everything. However, those bandits had a death wish. Since they were seen, they decided to kill the witness. The protagonist is completely speechless. He just wanted to go home. What trouble did he stir up? The robbers saw him as an easy target. They had no intention of letting him go. So, the protagonist had no choice but to fight back. He launched a firebomb that almost sent them to their graves. Unfortunately, their health bars were too thick, and they survived. They thought the male lead was a magician. So they planned to attack, but he easily knocked them down. The robbers questioned if he really was a magician. Then he accidentally revealed that he was unemployed. The group was instantly stunned. Since neither close-range nor long-range attacks work, then they'll use a weapon skill to counter. The male protagonist clearly remembered this is a move that requires over level 20 to use. And after selecting the skill, the body will move on its own. Fortunately, these people only look strong in terms of skills. They don't actually have much power. Not a single attack hit the male protagonist. Soon, the 3 guys wore themselves out. The male lead won easily. Just then, a noble girl in a carriage arrived before the male lead and thanked him. She introduced herself as Melia. Originally, the male lead really didn't want to get involved in unrelated matters. He just wanted to quickly return to the forest. Melia stated that she was the daughter of a lord from a nearby town and hoped the male lead could escort her home. She added there would be a reward afterwards. The male lead readily agreed. On the carriage, Melia asked him where he came from, but the male lead couldn't remember the town's name. He was still belittling it in his words. Little did he know that this girl was actually the lord's daughter of that town. The status he had been so proud of was instantly rendered worthless. And the final destination of this carriage was naturally the town the male lead had just escaped from. Thus, the male lead's second escape plan ended in failure. Meanwhile, the muscle group was preparing to fight the delinquent gang. But just as they were about to start fighting, a mysterious person suddenly appeared. The delinquents looked at the suddenly appearing mysterious person and decided to go to the street to fight him. They were quickly all defeated. Looking at this formidable opponent before them, Musclehead Head immediately ran away. However, the mysterious person leaped, and surprisingly appeared right before them. Dragging his large sword, he gradually approached them, but he didn't attack. When the Musclehead's men saw him clearly, they were all speechless. At this moment the male lead didn't know what happened in the woods. As darkness fell, he returned to the city amidst his cries of anguish. He cries, "Oh, Melia." She thought he hated this town and was desperately trying to escape. Her heart was shattered into a million pieces. What exactly did she do to offend the male lead, to make him hate her so much? Seeing Melia crying like that, the male lead was completely helpless. He could only obediently follow Melia to her house. After living in that cave for so long, this is the first time he has seen such a luxurious house. Territorial magnates are truly inhuman. The enormous house made him very uncomfortable. He paced around the living room. Then he prepared to slip away quickly, but before he reached the door, he was caught by Melia. It only took the time to change clothes. Sweetly talking about anime, the male lead wanted to escape again. Melia was so angry, she was puffing like a steam engine. Her mouth is practically reaching the sky. How could she not know the male lead's little thoughts? Melia, who claims the territory as her own, she's already prepared a huge feast. Melia prepared a delicious meal to entertain the male lead. Where would Melia put her face? When the male lead saw a table full of delicious food, he ate like he hadn't eaten in 100 years. While he is gorging on food, Melia is starting to doubt her life. She thinks, "I'm clearly such an important figure, and a stunning beauty too." Melia says the male lead only has eyes for food. Then Melia suddenly leans in. She pulls out a bag and places it in front of the male lead. Because she knew he didn't have an identity, she specially made him a black gold identity card. It even has the town's name engraved on it. As long as he has this, he can freely enter and leave the town. Melia only had one request. She hoped the male lead would remember the town's name. Unfortunately, he didn't even acknowledge her a single word. His mind was completely on the food. This feeling of being ignored was a first for Melia. Today, she even dressed up to entertain the male lead. She didn't expect that she would be less important than a table of delicious food. The next day, the male lead was surrounded by his female classmates. Although he had already explained that he went to the Lord's house last night, but the squad leader and the others are more concerned about what exactly the male lead did to be invited there. Running away is definitely out of the question. The male lead claims ignorance. Finally finished asking, the female classmates are preparing for their next mission. Before leaving, the squad leader gave him repeated instructions. He was told not to run away. The protagonist agreed very quickly. As soon as they left, he immediately prepared to act. Now that he has the ID card and the girls are gone, no one can stop him anymore. With the ID card in hand, he's ready to move. But before leaving, he first went to collect his reward and bought some equipment. Then, he enjoyed some delicious food and left a letter for the captain. After everything was prepared, he successfully exited the city gates. The scent of freedom was right before him. This time, no one could stop him. The protagonist successfully reached the forest. Familiar mushrooms and rivers surrounded him, and those silly goblins all made him feel at ease. Just as he was thinking about his little home, a wild boar monster suddenly appeared behind him. With his current strength, he easily dealt with the wild boar monster with a single strike. This kind of monster should only appear deep within the forest. He didn't have time to think. He seems particularly satisfied with his own strength. After combining all those items, the protagonist feels like he's on cheat mode, possessing every possible ability. After reviewing the data panel, he continues forward. On the ground, he spots a bloodstain. This makes him think of the otaku group and the muscle group. Moreover, the delinquent never emerged from the forest. An uneasy thought arose in his mind. There was no time to think. He immediately activated his search skill. A row of imprints appeared before his eyes. What he feared most right now was a fight breaking out between the muscle group and the delinquent. What he feared happened anyway. Soon he was in the lead. He found the severely injured muscle guys. A surge of furious anger filled the protagonist's heart. He clenched his fist. "I'm going to get revenge for them." Seeing that muscle guy still had a breath left, so he gave him the healing potion. He were treating them as if money was no object. Finally, under the power of money, the orange-haired guy slowly woke up. Upon learning that the female classmates had safely reached the town, he let out a sigh of relief. But what followed sounded like a final farewell. The narrator asks the male lead if they brought offerings for the class. This point is, of course, beyond doubt. Afterward, they talked about the evening. The male lead finally learns what happened. The muscular group all woke up. They were no match for the mysterious person. Even their weapons were taken. The orange-haired man had already guessed the mysterious person's next target. It was the class monitor. He possessed a skill-stealing ability. As long as he got that skill, the mysterious person would be invincible. But this was supposed to be something only the protagonist and the otaku group knew. Unexpectedly, the muscle group knew as well. Because the mysterious person desperately wanted to know where the class monitor went. Sweet anime talk. So the orange-haired guy guessed the secret. The reason the mysterious person beat them up like this was to use them to lure out the class monitor. The orange-haired guy figured this out, so they'll do the opposite. We've arrived outside the male lead's cave. The blood on the ground will surely attract him. With the male lead's help, we can defeat him. The male lead is hesitating right now. As a marginalized person, as long as he doesn't get involved, there's no danger. As long as he doesn't participate, there's no risk. But he has one condition. That is to go alone. Muscle-bound and staying put. Clearly, the odds of winning as a team are higher. There's no need to take risks. You can see the male protagonist's resolute gaze. They suddenly found themselves speechless. They decided to follow the male lead's decision. The male protagonist also assigned them a task, and that was to return and regroup with the class leader. Although unwilling and confused, the muscle man decided to obediently comply. After they left, the male lead felt melancholic. Having help would be much better in the cold, but if the whole team is wiped out, then the other would be in danger. Now, he must make the most of the limited time. He's making himself stronger. Unbeknownst to him, in town, the class monitor is searching everywhere for the missing male lead. The other female classmates aren't worried, thinking he'll be back soon. The male lead has also begun his preparations. His muscles and his weapons and skills are incredibly powerful, but once activated, it can't be cancelled. So now, he has to find a way to control his weapon skills. At this time, a group of goblins were attracted by the smell of blood. They're basically all level 19. Their levels are much higher than the protagonists, but for the sake of leveling up, he can only grit my teeth and go for it. But even if he defeat all these goblins, the protagonist's level still won't increase. We urgently need someone stronger to be the bodyguard. And then the male protagonist's plot armor activates. A giant goblin king appears. This perfectly fits the male protagonist's requirements. The Goblin King's power is incomparable to that of ordinary goblins. It's like heaven and earth, and even his attack mode is different. The male protagonist's cloak also has an evasion ability. This successfully dodged the Goblin King's attack. This also made the male protagonist certain of one thing. Even if the mysterious person used weapon skills, his cloak might barely allow him to dodge. However, it would be very difficult to counterattack. So he prepared to try his new skill. He used magic thread. Then he used all his skills. Everything was added to the wand. The Goblin King was instantly killed in one blow. The male protagonist's confidence suddenly soared. This was much more than what he had in the forest before. Now he finally had a way to deal with it. But before he could be happy for a second, someone even stronger suddenly appeared. A level 50 Goblin Emperor. He appeared behind the male lead without a sound. This is like fighting a boss in a newbie village. You have to remember, the male lead is only level 9. Even if he's fighting a monster above his level, this is too difficult. There's no escape. The male lead can only try his previous method again. He combined all his skills and added them to his wand. Then a new skill called was created. He risked everything and ran up the street as fast as he could. He didn't expect this trick to actually work and defeated the Goblin Emperor. But no harm was done. The Goblin Emperor stood up and struck directly. The male protagonist was scratched and injured his cheek. The male lead didn't expect that either. This guy actually knows how to attack with weapons. The male protagonist finally caught the attack and caused damage, knowing that the opponent will still return blood. And he also knows how to add skills when the male protagonist attack while there is space. Now the male protagonist has entered a particularly dangerous situation. Now is not the time to be depressed. He wouldn't allow himself to fail here. After getting back on his feet, he roared and charged towards the Goblin King. The two fought until dawn. As the sun rose, the protagonist's level finally reached 11. Exhausted, he immediately returned to base to rest. The male protagonist not only leveled up, but also acquired a new skill. Moreover, he understood the effect of the achieving nothing skill. Although level-ups became slower, the difficulty of learning new skills decreased. It also became easier to improve skill levels. Now, he has fully mastered the illusion and reality skill. This skill has no wind-up. It's the best skill to break through defenses. At the same time, the mysterious person has already followed the trail of blood, and arrived at the protagonist's base entrance. The two finally meet. The identity of this mysterious person is finally revealed. Who would have thought it was someone from the delinquent gang? The most unremarkable guy with glasses. He has endured humiliation all along. All for the sake of becoming the strongest. Meanwhile, in town, the female classmates had completed their mission and were about to head back. But they encountered the muscular squad leader at the city gates. They thought the protagonist might be with them. But all the joy is in vain. When they learned that the male protagonist is currently alone in the forest, the monitor's face couldn't help but start to look worried. Inside the forest, Tanaka revealed all his plans. It turns out that he controlled a gang of delinquents to attack the whole class, and except for the bad boys and muscle groups, he even killed them all. Tanaka completely disregards the protagonist. He said goodbye and went to find the monitor. But how could the protagonist let him off so easily? Even if he's a cursed person, there are still things he must protect. A major conflict is imminent. The protagonist declares that even if he is a cursed person, he also have things he needs to protect. Tanaka smiled slightly upon hearing this. If that's the case, then he decided to personally eliminate the male lead. He instantly unleashed terrifying power. He told the male lead, back in that white room, he had already confirmed that all of the protagonist's skills were trash. Therefore, he was absolutely certain the male lead is just a useless person. He randomly summoned a pile of rocks, then activated the skill mess that can instantly kill the male lead. Meanwhile, the class monitor, upon learning the male lead was fighting alone in the forest, immediately wanted to head over, but the muscle group stopped her right away. He told the squad leader that the protagonist would definitely be fine. Going over now would only distract him. So, the squad leader had to stay put and pray for the protagonist's safety. At this moment, the protagonist, affected by the mockery, was struggling to move. Tanaka saw that the protagonist managed to dodge the previous attack. He increased the magic output, but the protagonist dodged them all. This made Tanaka very angry. He originally thought the protagonist was just trash. Unexpectedly, he had such a hidden trick. Before killing the protagonist, Tanaka was very curious about when the protagonist started suspecting him. The male lead, however, stated that he had noticed something was wrong from the beginning, because he couldn't understand why a usually solitary genius would hang out with delinquents. Such keen observation skills, Tanaka couldn't help but admire him. Tanaka also had a question to ask the male lead. He's curious about when did Tanaka start planning this scheme. He confessed to the other party that he had obtained a new skill. He was already planning it, and as long as he utilizes those brainless delinquent boys, he can make him the strongest. Tanaka used magic to tie up the male protagonist, then hurled a fireball at him, but he immediately sensed something was wrong. The fireball magic he released was actually absorbed by the male protagonist. The reason why the male protagonist is fine is because he compounded the parasite onto the wand before. The effect of the parasite is to absorb magic. Taking advantage of Tanaka not yet using his weapon skill, the male protagonist went to the street intending to take him down. Unexpectedly, the other party directly summoned a large sword to block the attack. I didn't expect him to have a hidden trump card. The reason he hesitated just now was because he was considering which weapon to use to eliminate the male protagonist. He has many more weapons like this, powerful ones, but he was too lazy to choose. He decided to use all of his weapons to completely overwhelm the male lead. Then Tanaka attacked without switching weapons. The male lead, unable to figure out his opponent's attack style, quickly fell into a disadvantageous position. However, after a few minutes of fighting, he also discovered the opponent's ability to mimic and copy, and he guessed that Tanaka's target was the squad leader's ability to steal. As long as he mimics it from the class monitor first, then uses seize to take the class monitor's ability, he can perfectly obtain everything. Seeing his plan exposed by the male protagonist, Tanaka simply pulled out a sickle and attacked. The male lead finally found a chance to get close, but the opponent used an illusion to evade him. At that moment, the male lead stuck out his tongue. With a sidestep, he dodged Tanaka's attack directly. It turned out his defeated appearance earlier was just an act, and he immediately revealed that the opponent's mimicry skill could only be used 3 times. Tanaka panicked instantly. He didn't understand why his sharp attack suddenly couldn't hit the male protagonist. This is completely different from what he thought. In order to find out the weaknesses of imitation, the male protagonist just kept letting the water out on purpose. Through the previous confrontation, he has mastered the characteristics of the opponent's imitation skills. As long as you don't avoid attacks, you have a chance to win. But even after being exposed by the protagonist, Tanaka still didn't believe he would lose. He had as many weapons as he needed at his disposal. What he didn't expect was that the protagonist had already adapted to his speed. He struck him directly in the chest, rendering all of his skills useless. The protagonist could now completely dominate him. Tanaka was beaten back step by step. The resourceful Tanaka had secretly kept a trump card. Then he used various attacks to harass the male lead, and then he hit himself while doing so. By the time the male lead discovered him, it was already too late. The male lead immediately knelt to the ground, and Tanaka walked out from behind, letting out a burst of maniacal laughter. He finally beat the male lead. Tanaka felt extremely excited. He stepped on the male lead's head and brutally kicked him. Just as he turned around and was about to leave to find the class monitor, he heard the male lead's voice from behind. Tanaka was shocked. He doesn't understand why the male lead is only at level 11. He is still not dead after being hit by his ultimate move. The male protagonist explains that this is because he has the health skill. Immediate death can be classified as a status and can be directly eliminated. His star points are full, so he's basically immune to that skill. His appearance just now was all an act for Tanaka just to force his ultimate move. Tanaka is even more broken. The male lead clearly got hit by his own skill. Their movements should have been restricted. How are they still so free and at ease? Upon hearing this, the male protagonist retorted, asking if he knew the purpose of the Puppet Master skill. But Tanaka completely looked down on such a useless skill, thinking it was a skill only trash would use. Little did he know, the male protagonist relied on the Puppet Master's skill. He forcibly moved his body. Those seemingly useless skills were actually very useful. Tanaka couldn't accept it. He clearly had a lot of overpowered skills. How could he lose to the protagonist? He didn't swing his weapon to attack. He was defeated by the protagonist one by one. At this moment, he had completely fallen into madness. His meticulously planned scheme ended up in utter failure. The male lead reported him. Certainly, 1 + 1 undoubtedly equals 2 in the original world. But in the dark world of swords and magic, how could such rigid calculations possibly work? The answer to 1 + 1 here should be more than 2. Because this is a world where unknown numbers can result. This completely subverted Tanaka's knowledge. Before coming to the wing world, every day of his life was dull and boring. The school curriculum held no interest for him. Everyone around him was of low intelligence. He had absolutely no interest in school. He wished he could graduate early, and it was at that moment they crossed into the wing world. It filled him with excitement. The moment he saw the skill board, he thought that with a little planning, he could escape his boring life. So after calculating all sorts of scenarios, he found the formula that would make his future the most interesting. Even if this formula required him to be ruthless towards his classmates, he was willing to do it. In his view, as long as he takes everyone's external skills, he would be the strongest, invincible existence. But fate had to make him lose to the protagonist, a person with only trash skills. Furious, he charged at the protagonist with his sword. But the next second, his weapon was knocked away by the protagonist. The protagonist thought his opponent must have run out of tricks. Ready to move in and deliver the final blow. Unexpectedly, he fell into Tanaka's trap. What an exciting game of strategy. Viewers, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Unfortunately, the protagonist got caught. But like a cockroach, he just wouldn't die no matter what. At this moment, the protagonist knocked off Tanaka's glasses. And finally, through a mix of deception and reality, he completely turned the tables on Tanaka. The male lead accuses Tanaka. Even trash skills have their uses. He lacked advanced skills, but he understood very well how to utilize those skills. That's the key. The male lead won this match. But he knew clearly that if he had made even a slight mistake, he would have been the one eliminated. Now that the effect of the wooden man is gone, all the injuries he sustained before returned to him. And because of the overuse of magic just now, he can no longer hold on. Just as he was about to fall, the otaku group appeared before him. It turned out that they had gone to explore the maze earlier. After returning to the town, the class monitor told the male protagonist what happened, then came to the forest to support boys with their personal escort. The male protagonist also successfully returned to the town to talk about the battle. The squad leader and others got angry after seeing the male protagonist. Finally, he can talk in one breath. Female classmates surrounded him and asked for what happened. This male protagonist's fated encounter is really too much for him to handle. The muscle group also came to bother the male protagonist. While the hot girl group and the otaku group were happily chatting, the male protagonist, satisfied, secretly slipped away, preparing to return to the forest and continue being a loner. I really feel sorry for you. I'm really scared of what might happen if you die. What if you just leave and never come back? The male lead arrives here. He thought he made the class monitor cry again, but the class president didn't cry today, because the male protagonist has returned safely. That being said, he still couldn't escape being lectured. So, the female classmates carried him off directly. The male protagonist didn't expect to ultimately lose to this group of girls. The male protagonist didn't expect to ultimately lose to this group of girls. After returning to town, the male protagonist suddenly did something very strange. Deep within the labyrinth, a mysterious figure seems trapped, waiting to be rescued. At dawn, he felt something strange, but the male protagonist didn't pay it much mind. Having finally woken up early, the male protagonist arrived at the tavern to find the otaku group already assembled. Lately, they've been diligently exploring the labyrinth to reduce the number of monsters. Actually, besides leveling up and earning money, it's about obtaining a treasure from within the labyrinth. A rare item that can improve one's empathy. That kind of thing is perfect for them. These introverted shut-ins. But the male protagonist isn't much better himself. He has no right to criticize him. After the shut-ins set out, the male protagonist's scheming thoughts started again. Although they were very motivated, his own task had already been successfully completed. Now, there was no reason for him to stay in the town any longer. Only the forest is his destiny. His goal was always to live in a cave in the forest, enjoying the life of a free-spirited outsider. Unfortunately, his plan hadn't even begun before it was stifled. Because an ominous presence came from behind him. The class monitor glares at him furiously. The resentment emanating from her could kill 100 protagonists. He wants to have a serious discussion with the protagonist about what happened earlier. She truly looks very angry. The protagonist doesn't dare to interrupt anymore. He doesn't want to continue talking about what happened, because after coming back yesterday, he's already been drenched in a torrent of jealousy from those girls. The male lead thinks too simply. Those girls' methods are just child's play. He hasn't experienced one-on-one tutoring from the class monitor. Looking at the anger in her eyes, the male lead can already imagine his miserable end. The monitor questioned him about why he did such a dangerous thing. She spoke and warned him not to do that again. She shattered the male lead's heroic aura. His knees buckled uncontrollably. Seeing how sincere he was, the monitor finally let him off. From the male lead's perspective, the squad leader is a million times more terrifying than Tanaka. Psychological attacks are far more powerful than physical ones. He only has one worry now. That is, how can he avoid the squad leader and successfully return to live in the forest? At this moment, the otaku group's words popped into his mind. Perhaps if I obtain that item, I can do whatever I want. Easier said than done. The male protagonist immediately prepared to search for the item in the forest. Meanwhile, in the Spirit Map Mansion, Melia brought her brother a cup of hot tea. Because the number of monsters has been increasing recently, her brother's responsibilities have been growing heavier. He often stays up all night handling official matters. At this moment, the soldier in charge of guarding the labyrinth suddenly barged in. Unexpectedly, a large group of monsters suddenly appeared near the labyrinth. At this time, the protagonist was unaware of the looming danger. He was leisurely heading toward the labyrinth. He activated the track breath skill. He sensed an ominous aura nearby. He turned around. Unexpectedly, a boar king, accompanied by its minions, appeared before him. Our protagonist is no longer the same as before. He decided to use this monster to warm up. Outside the Adventurers Guild, the president was just about to ask the class monitor to deal with the nearby monsters when Melia hurriedly rushed in and told them about the massive monster invasion. The situation was dire. Several nearby villages had already been destroyed. Upon hearing this, all the adventurers were restless. They immediately prepared for action, for the sake of everyone's happy lives. The class monitor couldn't just stand by and watch. She hurriedly prepared to inform her classmates, but she suddenly realized that the male lead was struggling against the boar king. Facing these terrifying creatures in the eyes of others, the boar monsters instantly vanished into thin air. Not a trace remained. Then he realized the number of monsters was very large, but the male lead didn't take it to heart. At the town entrance, everyone from the Adventurers Guild has already received their weapons. Waiting at the gate, not allowing a single monster to approach. Unfortunately, their wait was ultimately useless, because the male lead is fiercely battling the Bear King. After discovering that normal attacks were ineffective, the male protagonist immediately increased his attack power. He easily knocked it down. Looking at the densely packed wild boar monsters before him, he felt a little puzzled. But the most important thing now was to find the rare item. He soon reached the maze. The feeling here was exactly the same as inside the small one. The male lead's heart began to pound with excitement. He was as comfortable as if he were strolling through his own backyard. He looked here and there, sweetly talking about anime. He stepped over quite a few boxes. However, most of the things inside were made of copper and iron. Morgan just doesn't like it. He searched high and low with great difficulty. Nothing to gain from sweetness. He began to suspect that the maze was a defective product. Then he suddenly remembered the old shopkeeper at the prop shop, so he prepared to go back and find out more about the maze. At this time, at the town gate, it's already dark, but everyone still hasn't received anything. Just when everyone thought it was fake information, the male protagonist slowly walked over from afar. Seeing everyone gathered here, he thought they were having a bonfire party. While arriving at the town's protection shift, he still didn't dare to tell everyone about his actions. Upon learning that the monster in the item was a wild boar monster, he finally realized what was going on. Seeing the male lead take out all the monsters himself, everyone was stunned, especially when he even treated it as a game. The female classmates were furious. The class monitor even slapped him. He clearly promised not to do anything dangerous, but still recklessly ran out. Yet, the male lead accomplished something great, but he still couldn't change the fate of being taught by everyone. Kneeling on the ground, he didn't even dare to lift his head, because recently, the number of monsters has been increasing. So the president speculates that within the ruins, a massive monster attack might be starting soon. Even if the male lead is strong, he shouldn't act rashly. That night, the male lead lay in bed, realizing it wasn't just his female classmates but even the student council president and Melia were watching him. The task of finding the prop became even more urgent, so the next day, he went to the prop shop. The old shopkeeper was a little stressed when he saw him. He was afraid he would fuse all his props together again. When he realized the man was asking about his props, he immediately relaxed. That rare prop is called the pheromone ring. The name itself sounds amazing. He quickly asked the owner where exactly is the ring in the maze. Why can't he find it? That's only natural, because as a rare item, this ring exists in an unexplored area. It should be located below the 50th floor of the maze, and the maze is said to have 100 floors in total. But to go deeper, it's not that simple, because each floor is guarded by a lord. If the lord isn't defeated, it's absolutely impossible to move forward. Not only that, the labyrinth is also filled with various traps. To this day, it holds many unsolved mysteries, so if you want to explore it, we absolutely must prepare healing potions. The male lead is immediately going to the general store to stock up. Little did he know, his conversation with the elder was overheard completely by the otaku. They immediately told the girls. Learning that the male lead is going to look for another ring, the class monitor got a headache. Why can't you just settle down? And the other girls are even more afraid. Something bad is definitely going to happen. So they reached a consensus. That is, they must stop the male lead from finding the ring. At this time, the male lead was on his way to the maze. He suddenly sensed an ominous aura again. He turned his head and saw the classmates all came here with eager eyes. He still doesn't know that his secret has been discovered. He mistakenly thinks they're heading to a higher level. However, the class leader won't keep things hidden. He directly exposed the secret that he's looking for the pheromone ring. The protagonist was instantly dumbfounded. He made up a lie on the spot, claiming he was searching for Solomon's ring to better communicate with those little animals. Nobody would believe such fanciful ideas. Look at everyone's skeptical expressions. The protagonist knew he couldn't convince them. Guarding the maze entrance to maintain balance, he couldn't stop these determined people. Watching the reluctant squad leader and others, the protagonist was afraid the ring would be taken by them. So he started running immediately. The class leader hurriedly tried to stop him from behind, warned him to be careful of the traps in the maze. However, the protagonist, with maxed out luck, wasn't worried at all. Whatever happens, happens. The protagonist stepped right into a trap. Then the nearby wall instantly broke open with a big hole. He couldn't react in time and fell right in. The squad leader wanted to save her but couldn't make it in time. Just a fraction of a second too late. They could only watch as the protagonist fell. No one knew how long he fell. The protagonist finally saw a light. Just as he was about to crash into the ground, the protagonist used earth magic to cushion himself. We finally arrived safely at the ground. He still doesn't know what kind this place is. He sees a corridor and doesn't dare to go in. He originally planned to use Blink Step to go back, but Blink Step is a movement skill. He can't go forward. But unexpectedly, the male lead actually woke up his spatial ability. The male lead actually awakened his spatial ability. He also mastered and detected trap skills. If only he'd gotten that skill earlier. It's completely too late now, but it's still useful that he got it. The male lead directly activated 2 skills. He depicted the entire layout of the maze. What he didn't expect was that he had fallen to the 101st floor, a hidden level. The boss on this floor is usually more terrifying, but he could only grit his teeth and move forward. The passage was filled with thick fog, and there are blue things that are angry. At the front door, the male protagonist felt a sense of uneasiness. He mustered up the courage to open the door. At this moment, a terrifying momentum rushed in. There is a skeleton corpse inside this door, and he is the legendary Maze Emperor. The level has reached the terrifying level 100. At another place, the squad leader and the others kept going until they reached the 47th floor, but they still haven't found the male lead. Although there was a portal after defeating the Lord, the otaku believes the male lead probably doesn't have it. After all, his route should be from top to bottom. Now, they can only pray that the male lead's luck is a little better. The protagonist of the otaku's heart is about to encounter the legendary Maze King. Everyone still doesn't know that the protagonist has already come across such an existence. Deep down, they feel even more afraid. They want to give up. But when they think about all the effort the protagonist has made for everyone, they unite as one. They decide to head to the deepest part together, welcoming the male lead's return. But the male lead isn't as relaxed as they are. Facing the Labyrinth King, he's under immense pressure. All the opponent's stats are unknown. It's simply the strongest forbidden magic in the winged world. Knowing this, the male lead is not afraid at all, but instead prepares to use a close-range attack. The Maze King gently landed. This unbelievably fast speed didn't frighten the male protagonist. Instead, he became excited. He immediately used his illusion skill, but he was still struck. Although it had no effect, the male protagonist was gradually seeing through the Maze King's abilities. He believed his next attack will hit him if it can. A bolt of lightning streaked through the dark night of the town. At this moment, the lord of the town was standing by the window, lost in thought. Amelia approached to serve him tea. She asked the lord if the distant flock of birds was heading toward the direction of the labyrinth. She had a premonition that something terrible was about to happen. The lord suggested she first visit the Adventurers Guild. They prepared in advance. Then Amelia, following the lord's instructions, went to the Adventurers Guild. She conveyed her ominous premonition to the guild members. However, the guild master stated that they had not yet received any reports from the labyrinth guards. However, the two union members nearby mentioned that the person guarding the place didn't seem very reliable. The guild leader thought it over carefully, and strongly agreed with their opinion. He regretted not being more careful when choosing someone. Since that's the case, let's inform everyone to prepare for action in advance. Then they suddenly remembered, the squad leader and the other rookie adventurers are missing. Amelia is very anxious right now. She just hopes her bad premonition doesn't come true. Meanwhile, in the labyrinth, the male protagonist, in order to defeat the super speed Labyrinth King, simply switched all his skills to speed mode. No matter how fast the male lead tries to go, he was initially trapped by the Labyrinth King. The male lead cut faster and faster. While chasing, his contact lenses suddenly reflected light. The next second, the Labyrinth King lunged at him. He obtained this from the gods. Transparent eyes that can predict the future. He saw the opponent's attack. And the time is very short. At least it shows a glimpse of the future. He knows very well that he can't afford to let his guard down even a little. Otherwise, he'd be immediately struck down. Although the situation is extremely intense and full of danger, the protagonist feels very happy. After enduring high-intensity challenges, the male lead's physical strength and magic power are almost exhausted. He doesn't know how long he can hold on. On the other hand, the Maze Emperor was able to do it with ease. No feeling of fatigue. Seeing the Maze King walking towards him step by step, the male protagonist knows very well that if the other party takes advantage of him now, then he will definitely die. But the Maze Emperor stood motionless in front of him. Looking at the Labyrinth Emperor, who hadn't launched an attack, the protagonist suddenly realized that the person before him was fundamentally different from other monsters. That difference was the Labyrinth Emperor's lack of killing intent. In other words, if the opponent harbored the intent to kill, they could kill the protagonist at any time. Truly worthy of being the hidden boss. This was the first time the boy had encountered such a formidable opponent. He attacked the Maze King again. Just as he was about to attack from behind, the opponent had already placed their sword at his throat. The protagonist was greatly shocked. Even so, the opponent still didn't kill him. Looking at the Maze King's sword suspended in mid-air, the protagonist began to speculate at this moment. The other person is controlled by this darkness. After observing for 5 seconds, the male protagonist concludes that the Labyrinth King is being forced to fight him. At this moment, the staff in the male protagonist's hand suddenly emits a bright light. Immediately afterward, the surrounding darkness is absorbed. The male protagonist guesses that it's the sanctity imbued in the staff. However, he still doesn't understand the situation. Returning to the past, he can only rely on this magic wand to take a gamble, so he launched another attack. He saw their weapons clash. The male protagonist took the opportunity to absorb all the darkness, and the Labyrinth King dropped his weapon at that moment. The male protagonist finally understood. The opponent should be because he couldn't escape the curse of darkness. Therefore, he desperately wanted to die. He didn't want to kill the male lead at all. Instead, he only wanted the male lead to defeat him. But what he didn't expect was, the darkness that had just been absorbed emerged again. The Labyrinth King was actually a blonde girl. The male lead thought that if he didn't kill her now, she would definitely be controlled by the darkness again. So he raised his wand, preparing to give her a final blow. But the male lead also wanted to give her a quick death, but his intuition told him he couldn't kill the Labyrinth King, because he knew the other person must be just like him, always alone. Just then, the male lead, without knowing how, suddenly used a summoning spell on the Labyrinth King. The atmosphere suddenly became very awkward. The Labyrinth King, level 100, actually became his little follower. The male lead didn't know whether to congratulate her or to ask her for guidance. Looking at her silent expression, the male lead still thought the other person was angry with him. However, Labyrinth Empress didn't care about him activating his skills on her. The male lead finally breathed a sigh of relief. It turned out that the other person had to understand what he meant. To be safe, the male lead again activated a fixed skill on Labyrinth Empress. He then discovered that her level had been reset to 1. So the command actually has this effect. And her name changed to Angelica. The male lead only then realized that the Labyrinth King was actually a woman, a member of the plutocracy. He accidentally forgot about the girl again. If the class monitor finds out, he is doomed. But he thought, she's a skeleton, it shouldn't matter. Afterward, the male protagonist took Angelica and prepared to leave. When he opened the door, the male protagonist first used his spatial control skill to survey the area. This was the 100th and lowest level. He immediately spotted a staircase. The male protagonist thought, as long as he climbed the staircase upward, he should be able to return to the surface now. At this moment, a ray of light appeared. The one who appeared was the boss of this level, the level 100 soul armor. Even if fights with all his might, the male lead has no chance against a level 100. Just now, the Maze Emperor spared him because she didn't plan to kill him. That's how he managed to survive. But the guy in front of him looks much harder to deal with. So, the protagonist can only hope to avoid him as much as possible. He tries to escape to the upper floor. Then he has a sudden idea. He thinks of using earth magic to break the floor above. Then he planned to escape using Void Step. But he didn't expect that there was actually a level 99 Minotaur guarding above. Luckily, his luck stat was maxed out. The Minotaur jumped down, and happened to land on the soul armor. Just like that, the level 100 boss's health bar went straight to 0. The male protagonist casually hit it once and finished it off. Angelica stared intently at him, seemingly disapproving of his victory method. But the next second, the male lead understood. She wanted to wear the armor that had burst open. To this, the male lead was quite generous, directly putting it on her. But judging by the looks of it, it was still a bit ill-fitting. But in a moment, the armor fitted Angelica perfectly. This conservative outfit is much more pleasing to the eye. It's far better than showing everyone her bones before. After the male lead activated his special skill, he discovered a curse on the armor. But now the armor has become one with her flesh and blood. She can't take it off. Angelica was extremely angry. The male lead suddenly felt like the squad leader possessed her. Then, she turned and walked away without looking back. Meanwhile, the squad leader and the others arrived at the 50th floor of the maze. After they reached the boss room, they found a Cyclops guarding it. The other male protagonist arrived at floor 98. After giving Angelica a storage cloak, he finally appeased her. Suddenly, the protagonist's passive skill for sensing presence detected the presence of monsters nearby. He activated his skill again. Soon, a level 98 Lich appeared before them. Its status panel indicated immunity to physical attacks, and even magic was effective only if it was holy. The protagonist considered creating another hole in the ceiling, but decided against it to avoid unnecessary trouble. He simply abandoned that idea. He suddenly remembered his wand. It had the effect of dispelling darkness. The Lich was instantly terrified upon seeing the glowing wand. The protagonist didn't expect this broken weapon to be so useful at a critical moment. Afterwards, the protagonist arrived at area 97. Looking at the moths here, he suddenly had a flash of inspiration. So he easily passed this level using fire magic. When he reached the 96th floor, he found that it was filled with silk nets. It turned out that the boss here was Mau Mau. So he used earth magic to create a wall of earth, then rolled it into a cylinder. But after reaching the 95th floor, he suddenly felt a powerful aura. In the mist, he vaguely saw several swords. He thought there would be at most level 95 monsters here. Unexpectedly, they were 2 level 100 bosses. Although the voice sounded human just now, the protagonist still felt that the opponent was full of flaws. Seizing the opportunity, he launched an attack, but it dodged. This kind of irregular movement is impossible for humans to imitate. The male lead talked excitedly about anime. Not only that, he kept talking about anime. It even included other swords as examples in his discussion. Given the current situation, it seems the only option is a showdown. Only then did he remember Angelica standing nearby. Angelica pulled out a crude sword to join the conversation. Ready to step out into action, still discussing anime. And people, sensing Angelica's presence, changed their formation to a circle. Angelica went straight to the center. Angelica actually one-shot the boss. She's incredibly powerful. They're safe now. The male lead didn't expect this time he would unexpectedly get such a reliable henchman. What else is there to be afraid of? But the class monitor's situation isn't so good. Facing the colossal titan, the class monitor and the others are in a tough spot. They're about to be unable to withstand the next attack. The squad leader was already prepared for death. At that moment, Shizaki and Oda helped her up. Shizaki mentioned they had come up with an idea. After learning about the plan, the squad leader wanted to refuse, but under Shizaki's repeated insistence, she eventually chose to compromise. Subsequently, Shizaki activated super speed and dashed forward. He's using this move to restrain the boss, while the girl sees the opportunity to attack and provide cover. But unexpectedly, he has other arms. He directly swatted away. Shizaki suddenly felt inferior. However, he also successfully bought Oda time to unleash his ultimate power. With everyone's cooperation, they finally defeated the Cyclops. Oda helped Shizaki up. Watching this united scene in the classroom, the class president felt immensely relieved. At this moment, she was very concerned about the male lead. She absolutely must reach the male lead quickly. Meanwhile, the male lead had also reached the 85th floor, but as soon as he arrived, he discovered a large group of monsters advancing.